So I want to start today's lesson with recapping, a recap of what we learned about yesterday. Okay, so what did we learn about yesterday? Okay, so these are some vocabularies that we talked about yesterday, or some processes that we talked about yesterday. So common factoring. And what did you say? Difference of squares? Okay. What else? Factoring by sum and product. What else? Why did we do that? Why did we learn about these three different things? Yeah.
Is it something to do with like the form, like how there's factor form and standard form?
Yeah. So something to do with the form, right? It's because sometimes I don't want it in a certain form and I want to switch it to what we call the factor form, right? So, and it's basically all these forms, right, are for me to go from standard form which is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, and to go to the factored form, which is, it can look like this. Right? So the three processes, they're called common factoring. Factoring by difference of squares. Factoring by sum and product. Okay? So the word factoring is repeating, right? All of them have the word factoring. I didn't write that. Factoring by difference of squares. Right? So I'm talking about a process of factoring. Okay? So I'm going from the standard form to the factor form by the process of factoring. So to begin with, in the previous unit, we started with what form? What form did we learn about last unit? The vertex form, right? And then we know the vertex form is useful because we can find the vertex. We can graph from the vertex. You remember that? And then we learned how I can go from vertex to standard, but now we're looking at how can you go from standard to factored, right? Do you guys remember from factored to standard? What do I have to do? If I want to go from factored to standard, what do I have to do? What's the opposite process? So if I want to go from this form to the standard form, what do you have to do? FOIL. And what's the name? FOIL is the acronym of the first, outer, inner, but what's the name of the total process, of the whole process? Starts with an E. Expanding. That's right. So if I want to go from this to this, I have to follow the process of expanding, which is, you guys know it as also FOIL, or it could be the distributive property as well. Okay? So we're putting all these forms together. Okay? Now, with respect to the three forms of factoring, what would be common factoring? What's common factoring for that? factoring the greatest common factor. So factoring a number or a term that can be divisible by all terms. Okay? So common factoring is basically factoring the GCF, right? The greatest common factor from all terms. Now, what about the other types? What's the second type that we talked about? Difference of squares. The difference of squares. And then the other one is a sum and product. Okay? Now, common factoring is always your first step. Okay? You always have to look at your polynomial and ask yourself, do I have a greatest common factor? Dream about it. Okay? That's always your first step when it comes to factoring. You have a greatest common factor? Good. You take it out, then you deal with the rest. Okay? Now, the other two types we talked about would be the difference of squares when can I do difference of squares? When can I perform the difference of squares? What do I need to have to be able to do difference of squares? Factor. Perfect square terms. What else? A minus sign between them. So I need to have two terms, right? I should have two terms. They have to be perfect squares and a minus between them, a subtraction. Do you consider this to be a difference of squares? This is difference of squares? Do I have two square terms?
Yes.
Do I have a minus between them?
Yes.
So I can use my difference of squares. How would I factor this? What do I need to do? What are the steps? How can I factor this? What are the steps? Two brackets.
Two brackets.
Yeah. A plus and a minus. Good. So you're going to square root the first term, put it in the first spot. Square root the second term, put it in the second spot. Right? And that would be my difference of squares factor. Are we good with that? Now, that difference of squares can happen after doing a greatest common factor. Okay? Now, what if I don't have two terms? What if I have three terms? So I have something that looks like this. And with an a equal to 1, because in this case we only learned, right? In this course we only learn if a is equal to 1. What process do I do in this case? Factor by sum and product. Okay? So your choices after looking at the common factor is, do I have two terms and it could be difference of squares, or do I have three terms and I have to do sum and product? Okay? Okay, now if we're doing factoring by sum and product, what am I looking at? How do I do the factoring by sum and product? Aiden? Other way around. Multiplies. That's right. So you're looking for two factors that multiply to C and add to B. And once you do that, once you find your factor, you can just write the factors in the actual bracket, right? So it will be x and then plus or minus your factor. I'm just going to put plus, okay? And then it will be your other factor, okay? So these right here will be your factors. And then the plus and the minus would depend on the actual factor, okay? If the factor is minus, it will come in as minus. If the factor is positive, it will come in as positive. This is what we learned yesterday, right? We learned that we can do common factoring, we can do difference of squares, or we can do sum and product. But we need to know that we do these processes if we are looking for the factored form, okay? Because factored form is going to tell us a very important information, and we're going to learn about what information will the factor form tell you, okay? Vertex form tells me what are the vertexes. Standard form tells me what?
The y-intercept or the c value?
The y-intercept, which is the c value. Now, another thing that we're going to learn about, what would the factored form tell me? What information the factored form is going to give me?
I was just going to ask.
Yes, and this is what we're going to learn. Okay? But before that, we need to look at multiple, like mixed factoring first. Okay? And then after mixed factoring, we will talk about why do we need the factors. Okay?